Ahsan Iqbal in a recent statement said that if the talks with the PTI government do not succeed, then the ultimate loser will be the PTI, as the government has the option to delay the elections for a year. Now, the first question that arises is that does the government have this option under the Constitution? Now, there are various provisions of the Constitution that deal with proclamations of emergency, and Article 232 of the Constitution deals with a proclamation of emergency in cases of war, external aggression, and internal disturbance. Now, there are two main ways in which an emergency under this article can be imposed. Firstly, if the president is satisfied that a situation exists which threatens the security of Pakistan through war, external aggression, or internal disturbance in a way that the provincial government cannot handle, then an emergency can be imposed. However, a resolution would also need to be passed by the provincial government. And the second way that an emergency can be imposed is by the president himself. If the president himself imposes an emergency, then in that case, it would need to be placed before both houses of parliament within 10 days and approved. Now, these are the two ways in which an emergency can be imposed. And if an emergency is imposed, then the tenure of the National Assembly can be extended for 1 year. However, if the proclamation ceases to exist at any time, then the elections must be held within 6 months of the proclamation ceasing to exist. Now, this is the way in which an emergency can be imposed, and in case it is imposed, then it is contemplated that the tenure of the National Assembly is extended for a year. But the next and more important question that arises is that in what situations can an emergency be imposed under this article? Now, the article itself refers to 3 situations: a situation of war, external aggression, or internal disturbance in a way that the government at the time cannot handle. And so this is a high threshold which would need to be satisfied, and it would not be enough to say that the law and order situation in the country is not ideal at the moment. It would need to be shown that there is an actual or imminent emergency and an extraordinary or out of the ordinary type of situation which cannot be handled by the governments at the time. And so it is quite clear that this is a very high threshold which would need to be satisfied before an emergency can be imposed. And in this regard, it's also important to point out that these 3 situations which are identified, which are external aggression, war, and internal disturbance, these are not situations where it would ordinarily you would be able to predict that they are about to happen. And in this case, members of the government and Ahsan Iqbal are saying that they will impose an emergency. So the government is actually predicting an emergency before an emergency situation has actually even, before an emergency situation exists. And it is quite clear that an emergency cannot be imposed at the whims of the government at the time, and that they would need to satisfy a particular threshold. And any proclamation of emergency that is issued would also need to survive judicial scrutiny. So it would ultimately be challenged in the courts. And in the current circumstances, at least, it would not be likely to survive judicial scrutiny, but it would ultimately end up in the courts, and the government would have to show the reasons why they have imposed such an emergency. And it's also important to point out that Pakistan got its democracy back in 2008. And any such proclamation of emergency would hinder the progress that has been achieved and take us back decades.